as the lazy moderator, I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves, but I'm also going to just get them to tell me where they sit in the sort of sphere of monetization. So I think hopefully we're all okay. Obviously, we have to share with the mics, so hopefully all will be good. So, do you want to, obviously we've had you on stage already, but do a quick kind of like 2-second summary of yourself and what you...
I am Stephanie Mello from 45 minutes ago. I am co-founder and CMO of a company called Quorum Control, and we make Tupelo, which is a blockchain platform sort of purpose-built for games.
I'm Božo Janković, working at Nordeus. We're probably best known for our soccer management game, Top 11. I work as a business development manager, taking care, among other things, of our ad monetization. So I'll probably be coming mostly from that angle today.
Hi, Doron. We have two operations. One is a studio that self-publish. We have 220 million downloads. The main title is a racing game called Trial Extreme. And the other hat is a platform that we created for game developers that basically came from our burden with data, A/B testing, etc. So we were developing something that will replace all this with AI and machine learning. So basically optimizing the ads and in-app purchase LTV, the company's Game of Whales.
I'm Chris Archer. I am the studio head for Rogue Games, a new mobile publisher.
I'm Matt Taylor. I head the supply team at Vungle, and we are an ad provider, so we help publishers and developers monetize their apps through advertising.
So I want to try and paint a picture of kind of where we are in the industry and kind of what our biases are. But let's sort of start with the idea of what are we thinking about when we first look at monetization. So what's the most important consideration to get started? I mean, Stephanie, do you want to sort of start?
Sure. I think that, I come from a retention background, and I think that a lot of emphasis is placed on the channels by which we acquire users. But I don't think a lot of time is spent in understanding how those users are different. And so I think there's a really big opportunity in early game monetization to create that long tail retention in sort of a concept of understanding leads by channel that I don't think that people spend a lot of time really putting strategic rigor behind. But it's not that Facebook doesn't convert on day zero. Therefore, it's just volume and it's crap, and you don't spend much money there. There is huge potential that you realize that Facebook takes about 4 days longer to convert, and you can invest your kind of retentive and monetization tactics appropriate for that kind of lead quality, as opposed to treating everybody the same regardless of where they came in.
And I kind of argue, based on stuff we were just hearing from Joe, that it's not just about lead quality, it's also what the motivations are for that segment.
100%, yeah. I mean, we know that, from one of the earlier panels, and this is sort of widely held, is that everything is cumulative. Every action we take is some cumulative response to the world that we live in. And treating things, ignoring that accumulation, ignoring that concept of human behavior shackles you, and you make these really sort of half-informed decisions. And I think that acquisition channels is a classic example of how we as marketers do that all the time.
Božo.
So I would say that for us, we're trying to focus on gamers' experience. So we're trying, if a user is ready to pay, why not offer him various types of, discounts and offers, and try to segment the users to try to give them what they actually want. But we do realize that most of our users are never going to convert on purchases, and that's where we have responsibility to offer something else for them to make sure that they can get the most out of the game without actually paying. And that's where we offer rewarded video ads and offer walls, and we try to keep the focus on this on these opt-in formats, so we don't bombard the users with ads. We are trying to give them the experience that they want to, and by segmenting segmenting users this way, we're basically trying to provide the most value for them, but on the other hand, try to monetize as many of them as possible.
So it sounds a bit to me like you're focusing on the utility for the player, that they would initially look at you. It sounds like you're focusing on where the IAP element of that is, and then giving other options to get to what that value is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Cool. Doron, what about for you? What's your kind of main consideration?
I'll divide the answer to two parts. I think the first part is the understanding of how the monetization or revenue look like. And if we had the luxury in the last few years to separate in-app purchase from ads and subscription and to rely each one separately, now we go to the time that optimization requires holistic view on the LTV that is consistent from in-app purchase, ads, and subscription on a user level. Once you get to this understanding, that's the first stage, then the future, or what needs to do in order to optimize the monetization, is cluster-based monetization strategy. This bombarding sentence means that if a user is predicted to be a payer, no, he doesn't need to see intrusive ads. And if he's predicted to play endlessly without paying, he can see intrusive ads and banners, etc., because the game publisher needs to treat every cluster differently as this cluster requires.
But that presumably requires quite a lot of data to be able to have, enough confidence you're not going to get false positives or false negatives. What's the kind of scale of data you need for that to work, though?
Not a lot, actually. It's not even a question of that. Yes, of course, a more complicated game will be easier to analyze and predict, and match 3 or bubble shooter will be tougher task, but achievable. But it's not a question of how much data you need. The less data you have, the more time you need to analyze. But if you flag your main decision based on behavioral segmentation, then you win, because never mind what channel they came from in the user acquisition, maybe they came from Google, maybe they came from Facebook or AppLovin or whatever, two separate people that came from two different user acquisition segments can behave in the same way that will lead to the same prediction and the same game experience. Once you have the data and can match them into a specific cluster and deal with them in the optimized way, you win.
So Chris, what about yourself?
I'm going to take it back a little bit, because everybody's talking about sort of after the product is shipped and sort of what we do after. From a design point of view, before it even hits the shelves, so to speak, it's all about player engagement. So it's all about getting them engaged in the game experience, how we're going to keep them engaged for a long period of time. And if we don't do that, then we're not even talking about how we can get them to even look at the product anymore. So every single little thing that we add to our games has to have something to do with player engagement. It's almost our mantra. It's like it has to engage the player, and that could be everything from incentivized ads, right? Because that can be engaging as well, to core game loop stuff.
I mean, for me, I mostly get that, but I feel like there's a need to look at the whole life cycle, because I think the need states of players changes dramatically in different phases. Is that your experience? Or
no, it's that's so true. I just thought that we shouldn't leave out sort of the, where we start.
No. But I meant actually,
from a game designer point of view.
Take a stab from a stone.
Exactly.
Well, actually, I was thinking from the game designer point of view, as in from the way that we design and craft the context loop of the game. So, if you think about the mechanic as the things we do, and the context as the reason why we keep doing it, and the metagame as the environment in which the game is played through, i.e. the social and cultural context, that, to me, is sort of that means that we have to pay attention even in day one when we're thinking about how progression or a sense of purpose or a sense of unfinished business is going to happen. If we're not incorporating that into our business model,
absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how we think about it.
You are 100% right. The retention is part of the score the game gets. So if you add everything together, and retention churn is a big part of that, you add retention to conversion, to ads ARPU, to in a purchase ARPU, to conversion rate, to ARPU. If you score everything together, then it doesn't matter if the user churn after a week when he monetized $200 or churn after 5 years when he monetized $10. At the end of the day, you need a score, and retention is part of this score.
So, Matthew, from an ad point of view, obviously we talked a lot about IAP. I think we talked about kind of a holistic gameplay point of view. Is there any specific considerations when you're looking at ads? And I'm obviously going to, with my background, I'm going to think, rewarded video. But is it, is there a wider thinking?
Yeah, the things that we consider are obviously retention, but the big aspects I would say are three things. There's rewarded versus interstitial video. Over 60% of our business now is interstitial video. I started at Vungle 5 years ago. I think it was 10% of our business. So that's been a big shift. The second piece is, what genre is your game? Card games. If you launch a card game with us, I know the exact advertisers that should be in there. I know the price points that you should be setting up in your game. If you're launching a builder game, it's a different set of advertisers, and we're going to be working with our demand team to make sure that they get in there. The last piece, I would say, the demographic data. If you're on the publishing side, you should let your ad network know who is your target audience. Male, female, are they 18 to 30, or are they 30 plus? Where are your users? It really helps us know which advertisers to go out and get. At Vungle, we have a whole different team that is working with people who are spitting that information to us. We want 35-year-old women in Nebraska. And on the publishing side, I can say, I've got that for you. So those are the three things that we really focus on.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I'd add a slightly additional kind of a way of looking at it. I think there's a way of looking at this in terms of friction. I'll come back to something you said about interstitial in a second, because I think it leads into the hyper-casual conversation generally. But if you look at kind of the way complexity of games seems to work, so from a hyper-casual through kind of like a casual game like a Golf Clash or so Guns a Boom, or even all the way up to something like as complicated as engaging as an EVE Online, there's an increasing kind of potential for retention that comes through that increasing complexity, but it comes at a price that the scale of that audience reduces. And for me, understanding kind of how that scale retention potential balance works, combined with understanding the friction, the player friction, and I think if you look at the hyper-casual game, we already know the long-term retention isn't necessarily going to be there, so the net impact of having an interstitial isn't as big. Is that a fair assumption?
I would agree.
So in terms of how important has been this hyper-casual trend, is it something that's bucking the norms of game design, or is it just an extension of this knowledge that if you're going to have low retention, it's not as much of an impact having these more intrusive style advertising?
The thing that hyper-casual publishers do better than most is they lead with ad monetization being a core revenue stream. And that makes my life a lot easier. So thank you to hyper-casual people here. But with that, they lead knowing, hey, we're not gonna have there's gonna be no whales in my game. There's no one buying anything. We know people are gonna stick around, so we have ads. We know that people are gonna be in here for maybe a week, like maybe, and we need to hit them with some ads, and they'll stick around for that week, but we need to make sure that we get some form of revenue in that short period of time.
So, Chris, I mean, does this you recognize this? I mean, do you feel that's the kind of familiar territory, or is there something more kind of complex as you get more sophisticated in gameplay?
I don't think it's that complex. And actually, I would say it's not even a week. It's probably 3 days. And so, it's in those cases. To me, it's a gold rush. It's like you put out a simple product that's very addictive, isn't very deep, right? You don't spend a lot against building it, right? It comes out quickly, and you have to monetize it in some way. And really the only way to monetize that is to, slam the player with ads as much as possible and try to make it before they leave. It's not necessarily, it doesn't sound sexy, right? It doesn't, but
pile them high, sell them cheap.
That is a business. It is a business, and so we have a couple of those titles ourselves, and we try to be a little bit nicer about it, and have more incentivized-oriented ads, but there's no other way to monetize it.
Do you think there's any lessons though for other types of games from the way that we've seen hyper-casual work, or is it its own thing?
I don't think that it would be acceptable in any other case, but that's just, my own opinion.
No, it's fair.
But it's super regional, right? Because it's totally acceptable in APAC.
Well,
right?
no, yeah.
But
that's a good
I mean,
exception.
like, I think that more than taking lessons away from hyper-casual, there are lessons in how it's done in APAC, like how, games with a huge life cycle it's culturally embedded that there's going to be lots of bells and whistles and noises, and so like, okay, well, maybe the argument is like, yes, they're saturated with messaging and offers, and so the performance on all is inherently deflated because there's cannibalism, but I think that the lessons are more in what works well there and how that can be incorporated into a strategy or an RPG or something a little bit more mid-core. But I think it comes to like the expectations you set with your players.
Yeah, and APAC is very much the exception, and I should have probably included that. But I couldn't see, even in some of the casual titles that we have, which retain or don't retain as well, I couldn't see doing using the same tactics. And so that's sort of the point I was making, was that at least in the West, it looks like that's its own kind of niche, and it doesn't belong in other games. But stranger things have happened, right?
For sure, yeah, for sure.
So, Božo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do agree with Chris. Like in the Western world, I don't see that this hyper-casual model of showing ads and being as proactive as they are in showing interstitials and everything else, that it would work for a developer who's more on a mid-core kind of genre. Of course, it depends on the audience and everything, but I just don't feel that retention will still be there if you just bombard the users with tons and tons of ads.
And I think that retention thing question is what in my head, because I look at kind of each of the monetization tools as not just having a revenue model, but also having a friction component, and that friction being basically a drag on their long-time lifetime value. And so unless you have the right frequency of play, you end up seeing players churn too early. At least that's the way I look at it. So I'm a little biased because I do some work for this company, Adinmo, who's an in-game world ad network. So that's about placing ads inside the game where they're observed by the player and not necessarily interacted with. So that's incredibly low friction, but it's one component compared to like opt-in ads, where obviously I spent lots of time talking about those, and the power of getting people to want to watch an ad is incredibly interesting.
Well, I also think there's the thing that I think is an important distinction here is because when we say interstitials, we're making an assumption on this panel that they are third-party ads. But there is actually a way to monetize in your game, even in an aggressive way, when you're talking about selling your own wares, right, or promoting your own things. And so a lot of what, one of the strategies when we were launching The Walking Dead was, at Scopely, was that we were up against kind of players' expectations of the game and their expectations of the franchise. And so we had to do a lot of message testing just in general, which meant that, we had to have lots of different live in-game interstitials running in different A/B splits for a long period of time, so that we could figure out how players that are just fans of the franchise play and how players that are just fans of the genre play. And what we found was that it was never so much conversion was never impacted negatively with the amount of content showed, even the disruptive kind, the full screen interstitials or the toasts, that it was very much content based because they weren't third-party ads. And so I think that what we've said here collectively is the assumption that we're talking about these third-party ads, but there is a way to actually communicate and monetize using even invasive interstitials in your game in a different way when you're talking about like your first-party stuff.
That's actually slightly different from data I've seen, but it's not completely out there.
Right. Again, I mean, it's like, I worked on games that were literal skins, like just they coded even the bugs, right? Like they just took everything and just slapped a new skin on it, and the tests yielded different results, right? So it's tricky because when you're message testing, at least for first-party ads, when you're message testing, it's got to be super relevant to the thing that you're building for. So a PvP tournament or a gacha event or whatever it is, it's got to be super relevant. And then you've got to start testing things like when we say a helpful hint, is 2 pithy words a helpful hint? Is a big explainer, and testing those things. But you're using, at the end of the day, like the user is experiencing an interstitial ad. So I think as builders, we have a tendency to talk about the delivery mechanism and the thing as different, but for the user, they are the same. But I do think that there is an inherent behavioral experience that changes when you're talking about third-party ads versus first-party ads.
Yeah, I think to me it comes down to smart use of the data again. I mean, I think the number of times, and obviously most examples I'm thinking of are where you've got this kind of interstitial moment, but it's tutorial or onboarding or something like that. And there is obviously some different measures there. Maybe if you're looking forward to seeing something, that's a different thing as well. So Doron, I mean, from the data point of view, how much tracking of this kind of stuff matters? I mean, in Stephanie's example of a non-ad interstitial moment, are you seeing that has an impact on the long-term lifetime of a game player or anything like that?
Yeah, I'll start with the ad side, because what we saw in the last couple of years since the hyper-casual trend is something that happened to the, how to call them, other companies that are not hyper-casual. And that,
casual, mid-core, hardcore.
Yeah, all the rest of the world, the normal people. So what happened is that ad monetization became legit. So before that, when you spoke with a serious game company and you would speak with them about intrusive ads, I mean interstitial banners from third party, they would say, evil. No, of course not. We care a lot about our user experience. We respect our 1% that are paying in the game, so we don't show ads to anybody. And what happened in the Voodoo catch-up days, that they were sitting and looking at companies becoming from nowhere to hundreds of millions, billions, whatever, a lot of zeros, just by showing ads. So somebody in the seat of CRO sat and said, okay, so when you approach these companies with the ability to cluster users by prediction in advance and to say, okay, we might not know exactly who are the 98% that are not going to convert, but these 60%, they are not going to convert. And you see companies, even in the gambling side, in the slot machine side, that are more open to put intrusive ads for this kind of users, because it's going towards a future of cluster-based monetization. So if this user is not going to pay, why not to maximize the 30 days that is going to play?
So with this idea of kind of like segmentation and analysis, and actually I think, Matthew, something you said earlier about having the right companies advertising for that right game, how much intelligence is there out there for people to use now, and do you think it's going to get richer or more complicated?
Right now, I would say you have, I'm speaking strictly from Vungle's point of view, speak to your point of contact there. If you launch, I'll just use the card game example, and you start guessing on all the price points you should be setting up. I want to set up a $20 price point, and I want to capture as much money there, and a $15 price point, capture as much money there, and trickle all the way down. You're kind of guessing. But if you're speaking to me, I can tell you what MobilityWare does. I'm not going to tell you exactly what they do, but I'm going to tell you to a point, what does their waterfall look like? What does Zynga's waterfall look like? What does Scopely's waterfall look like? And I can help you get parity with those type of companies. Now, I think in the future, it's going to be a little bit more self-serve. When you launch a game with Vungle, this is forward-looking, and you put in a few points of reference for us, we're going to be able to better inform you of how you should be setting up ad monetization with us. So it is very manual right now. I mean, it's pretty good, but it's manual. In the future, we want to get that too. You don't need to speak to anyone in order to monetize your app.
What I'm wondering about, though, in terms of taking that a little further, are there ways where we can think about our game design in a way that attracts that, maybe that programmatic audience, or even the header information within the programmatic to be more effective, so that our game is going to be the one that's going to pop out with those automatic self-service systems?
Say that one more time.
So you know how programmatic is increasing,
Yep.
and sometimes people are starting to look at the header information
Yep.
to be able to focus more effectively. What can we as game designers do to increase our chances for us to be the ones that pop out?
If I knew the answer to that, I would start a gaming company.
You can't blame me for asking.
Yeah, no, let me think on that one. I don't have an answer to that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We can come back if you think of a magic. I mean, this is where I was trying to get to. Really, is I think this self-service model is increasingly important, and it's getting more sophisticated.
Yep.
And I can kind of understand it from a purchasing point of view, from a user acquisition point of view, but from a monetization point of view, we tend to be quite passive, don't we?
Yes.
And I feel like one of the things that I'm interested in trying to do is find ways where, as a designer, I can ensure my game's in the best position to be the best target for that advertiser.
I mean, I forget who said it earlier. What was interesting was if you launch a mid-core game, the assumption is that you can't show interstitial ads in a mid-core game.
Yeah.
I would challenge that assumption. One of our biggest partners is a mid-core game that they've had interstitials the whole life of their game. They shut off interstitial ads to see, will retention get better? Will in-app purchases change? They just lost a bunch of money. They lost all of their interstitial revenue for a month, and we're like, we got to get this thing back on. So if I was a game designer and in-app purchase is the core revenue stream for you, I would just think about how could I incorporate ad monetization in there more effectively. I don't think you need to show 15 ads per user per session, but there's probably a middle ground that you could get to.
Yeah, I can concur. I concur that we saw nothing but negative impact when we made rash decisions like all or nothing. It really, really is. I mean, we're marketers. Strategic testing is our livelihood, right? And the idea that it's all or nothing, or the idea that you subscribe to this idea that people don't want something, that it's invasive or whatever, might be true in 80% of your audience, but it's never all or nothing. We totally were impacted quite negatively revenue-wise from the DA revenue.
So Chris, you seem to be one of the people who want to really make sure you're being a good guy, quote unquote, whatever that is.
Don't quote me on that.
Is it timing? Is it more about timing than it is all or nothing? Is it about, because I feel like it's like there's a rest and relief moment, and if you put it the wrong place, you then screw up your experience.
I'd say the answer is probably, a simple answer is yes, there is a time and a place, but if you're thinking about mid-core, and I would add a little bit more to what you guys are talking about, we do have mid-core titles, we do have advertisements in those mid-core titles, and I would say that a year or two ago, that would have been sacrilege, which is basically what you were saying, because you wouldn't want to run off a customer that was, it's a paying game, and so don't put ads in it. When we do opt-in ads and reward ads, they're very powerful, especially for people that are on the cusp, people that might pay. And so this, like you said, at the right time. And so if we can identify a player that's very engaged and needs a few extra gems, we can offer them that, even a dual offer where one is a purchase and one is an opt-in, and so we can do that dynamically, and that's exciting because you get somebody that's just right there, and then then they're a payer, and then obviously once they're a payer, we can, they're going to be a payer.
We saw the most success with that when we did timing testing on that. So people just lose in a punishing way, or they're about to leave and they haven't taken X action. Yes, you have to have the tech or the data intelligence to do those kind of hyper-targeted moments, but timing really is critical, and you can run anything anywhere.
Well, and we see even some of our own games that when we get them and we start working on them, actually do it. The inverse, right? They're actually, you lose, and then all of a sudden you're seeing an ad. And, we found very clearly that when you win, if you're doing ads at all and you win a few matches, that showing them an ad after they've won is a much better place to put it than when they've lost, because you've just basically said, you're no good at this, go over there.
No,
Yeah, we had a lot of success with stoking, motivation, stoking the competitive edge, where it'd be like, I can't believe you're not just going to leave and let that guy do that to you, right? Like, I can't believe he just did that. It's crazy. Here's some, watch this ad and get whatever, so you can go fight him back.
Yeah, at least if you do that, use cross promo and put them into one.
Totally, yeah.
Exactly. I can add data point for that, because we discovered something really interesting lately. We are now controlling who sees ads, who doesn't see ads by prediction, etc., and A/B test automatically to know what's the impact of not showing ads and showing ads. And in some games, it's not conclusive. It's not all games behave the same. In some games, removing interstitial ads from people that are predicted to become payers showed less good performance than showing interstitials.
Absolutely. I've seen this happen so many times. Whenever I see the pay money to get rid of the ads, I absolutely gonna get really angry, because every time I've worked on a product that did that, it had less money. And I keep trying to explain to people, don't let people do that, because the people you're getting rid of are the very people who spend, who are the very people that advertisers want, and you're actually not just removing the ability to fulfill the ad value of the game that you're making, you're also making the value of the ads that you get less, because the people aren't as interesting.
It also screws up your analysis on payers.
I was just going to say the same thing. And
millions of people that spent $4.99. You're like, these aren't real.
Yeah.
So, Božo, you had something you wanted to add there.
I wanted to add something on this, ads versus no ads. I actually read every morning messages from our Vale users, and hearing their thoughts and stuff. And one of the things that they often come about is they're saying, "Show us more ads. We want more ads. We want more rewarded video," because of course they are incentivized. But yeah, it was something that was truly interesting for us, that when for the first time we saw that people actually want to see ads because they see value in it if it's implemented the right way.
I think that implemented the right way is a really critical thing as well. One thing I learned when I was doing the Unity ad stuff was the coins weren't as effective as something like a trial. To get free use of something was way more valuable and had at least got a footpath between showing the user that this thing had there was a reason why it cost money to buy it, and it was good, and I got value from watching an ad that was above and beyond what I would have expected otherwise. So, Matthew, you've seen patterns like this yourself in terms of like what offers people put alongside, for example, a rewarded ad, how that impacts, people's, willingness to view.
Yes, there is testing around that. A lot of publishers don't share that information with us that much. Right. I'd actually probably call on Stephanie. Yeah, I mean, there's many times we'll see fluctuations on rewarded performance with a given publisher, and then we'll ask, what happened here, and they're toggling with what they're giving with, what is that user getting from watching a video ad. So I can't give you the magic answer to that, but I think it's really important that you test it around, talk to other publishers who are in the same genre, ask them what they're doing, seeing what's working. Yeah, that would be my answer.
So a quick question from the audience. Does anyone want to add something at this point? I'm going to look around. No, so I'm going to go straight to my, given the timing, I'm going to go straight to my sort of last thing. What's sort of one piece of advice? Sorry, I think of the wrong panel here. In a short sentence,
we can do it.
I have so many panels to run today, so apologies. In kind of one sentence, so what's the thing that you think people should be looking out for right now? What's the one thing they should be focusing on it to improve their monetization in the next 12 months?
Invest in understanding the data. I mean, invest in really truly understanding what your players are doing in the game in order to deliver things that drive those motivations. Because you hear like dynamic content, you hear all of this, but it really is about creating a curated experience that is an experience. It's bigger than the things you're selling them or the PvP or events you're running for them. And don't be afraid to kill your darlings. I think we're a lot of smart people, and we make a lot of people in the industry have been doing it for a long time, and they're just convinced that this feature will drive high monetization, or they know that red is the color that will drive people to watch this ad, and it's kill your darlings and understand your data.
Okay, so +1 on this. Plus, I would say that there's no one size fits everyone, but I guess that maybe, you know, whatever you're not doing right now or you haven't done so far, maybe it's time to try it out. So if you have no ads whatsoever in your game and you're focusing solely on in-app purchases, maybe it's time to actually try it. If you're doing in-app purchases the way it's been done for like last 10 years and you're not creating any dynamic offers, you're not segmenting users, you're not targeting them at specific times, maybe it's time to try that out. And in general, like we see some new trends with the subscriptions and everything. I think that what I'm trying to say is that maybe it's time for developers to diversify their revenue streams to see what fits them best and to create multiple touch points so they monetize the users in different ways, not only rely on a single solution.
Plus one. And just to give a bottom line, it's after you understand the data and you understand that not all users need the same treatment, it's cluster-based monetization strategy.
Short and sweet. I'm going to keep adding to this because I think from an even higher level, we're talking about the relationship with the player, right? So not just data, but also talking to the community during betas, really listening, a lot of testing, and sort of, you know, there's guttural elements to this as well. It's not just the data, and so. I love the data. We all live data every single day, but I also want to see developers having a better player relationship.
Can you repeat the question? Those were all great answers. The question was,
what's the one piece of advice you would give to people to focus on?
Yes. The one thing I would advise you to do is talk to your ad providers, see what's working with similar companies that you would kind of comp yourself next to. And if things aren't working, latch on to your ad partner and figure out why it's not working. There's always a reason it's not working, and there's a little bit of a risk that we like to share with you to make it work. So yeah, just ask us. The more help you can ask and we can provide to you, the better.
So plus one. There's lots of pluses. I'd add this, it should be about what players love. Monetization is about asking somebody to give us their valuable time and money and eyeballs to our game. And anything that we put into our game has to make the experience better. So if I see a billboard in the world that happens to be something that's real, that's a brand, that should make the world that I'm playing in feel more real. If I'm going to choose a rewarded video ad, the reward I'm getting needs to make my game more deeply engaging. If I'm going to buy something, that needs to make sure that I am feeling that I'm getting value and excitement. And if I don't provide that anticipation, desire, and fear of missing out, then no one's going to buy anything. Thank you.